Hi, I'm Fitzgerald, and thanks as always for joining me for the Jazz Bass Technique series. Our guest in this episode is Brazilian bassist Hamilton Pinheiro. You may remember Hamilton from a previous video on bossa nova and Brazilian styles. For those of you who don't know him, Hamilton is an amazing bassist, musician, and jazz educator who finished his graduate studies here at the University of Louisville last spring in 2018 and returned to Brazil to continue his career in education. As part of his career in education, he is starting a video series of his own related to bass and jazz bass techniques. And as part of that series, he asked if I would film several episodes for him about walking bass and basic jazz topics that he could use in his series and translate them into Portuguese. Hamilton is such a great musician and friend that of course I agreed, and he was also kind enough to let me use the interview videos that he made before he left here as part of this series as well. What you'll see in this video, it's about an hour long, but you will see 15 or 20 topics covered in an interview format where he's asking me questions and I'm doing the best I can to answer them, both in words and in music through the bass. There are 2 full-length duo performances of jazz standards, and everything that is played in the course of this video is transcribed into notation. It will be displayed once at the bottom of the screen as it's being played on the video, and you can also download it as a free PDF that includes everything that is played on the video that is a walking bass line. There are over 500 measures of walking bass lines transcribed on the PDF, so I think it would be really worth your while to download it. For those who don't have a lot of time to watch a long span of video content all at once, there's a really easy way to use the indexing feature of this video. On the screen during each segment or each topic that's being covered, there is an information bar at the bottom of the screen. Beneath the YouTube window that you're currently watching, where you click on Show More, there is a full index of topics that are covered, and each index is accompanied by a timestamp so that you can figure out exactly, if you want to look at that topic, you can just go exactly to that point in the video. And those timestamps are live for people watching on a computer rather than an iOS device. So that's about it. I hope you enjoy the video. We'll begin with a performance Hamilton and I did of the jazz standard On the Sunny Side of the Street. Enjoy.
1, 2. Good. Well, it's an enormous, really great pleasure being here with you. Chris Fitzgerald, my mentor. We've been working here for
Almost 2 years.
almost 2 years.
Yeah.
He taught me a lot of stuff about jazz, like things that I would never imagine that could exist. So deep was like the lesson here. One thing that I always think when we have our lessons here, like you always brought me questions that I could not have the answer. Like we used to play some tune, and he would bring, what do you think about this and that? And I would be, okay, I've never thought about that. It's like always bringing some deep questions to me, and I learned a lot being here with you, and it's a great pleasure to have this opportunity of bringing the knowledge of jazz from a jazz player, excellent and outstanding musician, and outstanding, not only an outstanding bass player, but also an outstanding musician, as the word musician should be. This guy is one of my biggest reference on bass player, on musician, and also as a human being. So
Now that I'm thoroughly embarrassed, thank you.
so it's a huge pleasure to be here with you. Okay, let's talk a little about the jazz, the genre, the musical genre itself. Could you talk about the main characteristics of the jazz, like in general, Like for example, for a student who have never listened to jazz or are getting into the jazz right now, or have listened to some stuff, would like to learn, or have played some, but there's the musician who doesn't have, doesn't have a deep knowledge about jazz. What main characteristics would you tell to
I
this
think
student?
in the simplest form, I would describe it as music where you have a song which existed as a way to communicate, usually lyrics and a melody, and the lyrics and the melody fit into a form, and the form is the song. I always consider the melody is the song, right? And everything else flows from the melody. And so jazz musicians tend to take that form and use it as a vehicle for improvisation, hopefully on the melody and embellishing the melody and never forgetting the melody when they play. But it's basically becomes like a predefined room that you can play in to improvise on the topic of that song.
Yeah.
Is the best short way I can put it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And because of that, like the performance practice of jazz would be like, we state the melody, we have a solo section, and we restate the melody at the end.
Right.
This is the main. And this solo section is the way, the portion of the tune that we will be able to express ourselves through the improvisation. But a very good thing, not forgetting the melody.
Right, because the melody is the song.
Yes, exactly. I remember one of our class, I think it was the improv class last semester, when you mentioned, okay, there's some kids that they are playing the melody just to get rid of the melody and get into the improvisation. Like, they play the melody like anyway.
That's not what I think of as jazz. Yeah.
Yes. And in terms of rhythm approach of the melody, of the genre, accents, feel, what you could you tell about the...
It's hard to say altogether what jazz is because jazz has come to mean so many different things. But if we say what does swing jazz basically feel like, some of the characteristics it have are highly syncopated music, even syncopated in the beat, so that you will hear the offbeats accented in the percussion and the drum parts on the cymbal. You'll hear 2 and 4 accented on the cymbal, not necessarily on the bass. So lots of people think you should do that, and not always, and sometimes not at all. But yes, you, instead of hearing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think it's important. I learned a lot from working with Hamilton as well, because when I was a rock musician, the rock music always had this backbeat, which was the same as the jazz backbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then when working on Brazilian music, he's teaching all of the students here how, instead of thinking of it in 4, you think of it in 2, with the emphasis on the 2. So it's very important to understand that that's part of the rhythmic framework of the music. Yeah.
Yes. And also the triplet feel, like the general triplet feel.
Yeah, the triplet feel is very complicated because lots of people will teach that the swing feel always has the triplet underneath it. And it doesn't always. It's more common when the tempo is slow. So if you're walking at this tempo, you hear that, and that triplet is implied underneath there in the swing. You have to be careful about taking that idea too far, though, because when the tempo is very, very fast, there's no room for that division. And so you should be very, very careful to always say, if someone says that a swing feel in eighth notes is a triplet feel with, that can be a very square swing feel, especially as the tempo goes up.
Yes, and actually it's not as precise as we think that it is.
No, not at all. No.
There's some computer research about that, like playing some of the famous recordings, they found that it's not as precise as we think, but probably the best way to get the feel is just listen to the record,
yes,
to the recordings and sing along the.
But certainly in the framework of swing, you know, if we're walking at the tempo that we just played, you definitely hear that triplet underneath it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's there, it's implied, you just have to be careful not to take the idea too far.
Yeah,
Yes.
and when you have a fast tempo, like it's a little closer to... It's not so swingy.
Yeah, you don't have time to go, brrr, you know, it's more implied, and there you kind of let go of the triplet, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so, what's the role of the bass line in a jazz tune? What would you say?
In the most basic beginning sense, the role of the bass line is twofold. It is to propel the rhythm of the song and to outline the form of the song. So I'm sort of giving the roots of the chord motion and hopefully making those roots feel really good to play over. So I'm outlining, you know, the chord changes, but I'm also outlining the rhythm and making the rhythm propel itself forward over the form of the song.
Okay. In practical terms, what do you play? Like in a general, like we have two approach that we play jazz.
Oh, right. You mean the two-feel and the walking? Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, sure. So a two-feel is basically what it sounds like. In its most basic sense, it's playing two notes to the bar, basically half notes and breaking the bar into two parts, which is what we did at the very beginning of what we played.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3.
And we feel 1, 2.
Yeah.
1, 2. But we keep the same bar, like the same time signature. We don't change. Just the feel comes as it was in 2.
And the two-feel, it's really best for students who are getting started to really practice the two-feel literally like I just did. Of course, not as I did in the beginning of this, right? Yeah. So you start by saying, I'm going to connect this C to this E to this F to maybe B, E, A, right? And as you get more advanced, you start embellishing that two-feel, so you end up with so it becomes much more of a improvisatory two-feel. Students need to be careful to go one step at a time and don't embellish until you know what you're embellishing.
Yes. They have, like, while playing, they have always to feel the two-feel.
Yes.
Even if they are not playing, but they have to feel and make the bass line relate to that feel.
Very much.
So it will fit. Without that, we just like random notes around the rhythm. And the second one is the walking bass line.
Yeah, so the walking bass line, you're doing the same thing. You're connecting the harmonic foundations together. And I'm going to use the word foundations instead of roots because the foundation is not always the root. But again, for beginning students, you want to start connecting roots. So I want to be thinking C, E, F, B, E, A, D, etc. So it's like I know part of what I'm supposed to play when I'm doing a walking line, and I have freedom between those points that I'm trying to reach them in creative ways. And every bass student learning to walk a line starts with a very limited vocabulary. Maybe they only know one way to get from one chord to the next, and then as they get more experience, they'll learn, oh, here's two more ways to get from this C to this E, right? At first, maybe they only know. Then the next time they may say, all right, now I want to add to that. And then they may go. And so the longer that you do it, the more vocabulary that you develop to connect one chord to the next in a creative way. But as always, we start from the simplest way to do things, and more importantly, the clearest ways to do things, because our role at the bottom of the ensemble is to make sure the people who we're playing with understand where we are.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Which means outlining the chords.
Yes.
and define the form.
Yes.
And connecting the chords.
Yeah.
Like I think the best way, one good way to describe is using the word walking. So you are walking through the chords. And
Right.
it's kind of sense of forward motion.
Yes.
Like you are walking forward motion. It's not a steady line that you like keep in one place and jump to the other. Like
Right.
that is the
Walking where every fifth step is incredibly important.
yeah. And one question just because I remember one of my students playing. Should the bass line sound weird? Because we can play simple lines, complex lines, and the complex line sometimes I can say doesn't outline, but it's a little obscure about the bass line because the bass player takes some freedom to go to different ways sometimes. Make some chord substitutions, getting inversions, and it sounds a little, how can I say, missing word.
I think I know where you're going with this. So
Yeah.
I would say the bass line should sound above all, it should be clear, right?
Clear.
Our job is to communicate to the other players where we are in the form. So if I'm playing a line that clearly shows I am right here with you, as you're improvising along with me, then I'm doing my job. If I play something that confuses the other people I'm playing with as far as where we are in the song, then I'm not really serving the music. I'm sort of serving my own agenda. Maybe I'm bored and tired of playing the same thing, but my goal is to really support the rest of the ensemble. So I need to be, first of all, I think the word I would use is clear. Your line has to be clear as to where you are going. Later, many years later, when you're playing with people who don't need you to be clear all the time to understand where you are, and people that you've played with for a long time, you can be a little more abstract with your line. But for beginners, and I tell every student who comes through the university and in their lessons, I want to hear the most clear bass line you can play, so that if I walked in the room when you were halfway through, I would say you are on bar 6 of this song. Immediately, I would know that, right?
Yeah.
And that's our job. So to be clear, no, it should not sound weird.
Yeah, just remember that because one of my students a long time ago, he said, "Man, I have never played a jazz tune, and this weekend I had to play, and I didn't know exactly what to do, and I played like." Because there is a sense that the chromaticism must be a part of the
Right.
walking bass line.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't play the chromatic stuff, like you are not playing a walking bass line. Is that true?
No. No, absolutely not. I mean, the chromaticism is a way to connect two notes sometimes, but you can play perfectly clearly without it. If you go back far enough in jazz history, many bass lines were built much more simply than they are today. And as a result, they were also very clear.
Yeah,
So, no,
that's good.
it's useful but not essential.
Okay, so let's use the tune that we just played on the sunny side of the street.
Sure.
Let's use this tune as a reference, like for a person who is getting into the jazz vocabulary for now, like probably a person who has not played or have played some, but doesn't know exactly how to start a good bass line, like an authentic bass line with a good foundation. With a logical way to build a nice walking curve, outlining the chord change, giving the sense of form. How we would approach that, like as a beginning, to build the walking bass line through on the sunny side of the street, and this is specific tune that we are working mostly because almost all the bars has one chord per bar.
Right.
How can we start?
Okay, well, a really good way to start is to start with a two feel and come up with the idea of what is, so basically you start on one chord and you're trying to lead to this chord, and then you're trying to lead to this, so it's C, E, F, E, A. right? The changes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we say 1 chord per bar, what I'm really trying to do is to say, okay, if I'm on this C, what leads to this E, right? The simplest thing to do is to use a chromatic approach note, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I could also play a scale tone. Basically, I want to step into that E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Just to take those bars, right?
Yes.
And sometimes I used a whole step and sometimes I used a half step, depending on what sounded good to me. But if you can do that in a 2-feel, then you have a note that leads into your next chord. And so that's always nice.
Okay, so you are connecting these notes using some of the notes of the scale that connects the roots of the chords, or chromatic approach
Yes.
to that note,
Yeah.
that specific note.
I mean, I could be way more technical than that, but I don't know if that's what you want.
It can be.
Okay. So the way that I look at it is, if I'm on this C and I need to go to an E, and I'm trying to find an approach note to it that is logical, step to it, I can either go chromatic from below, I can go chromatic from above, I can go diatonic from below, which means from the scale,
Scale.
or I can go diatonic from above, and here's where it gets confusing. Because the diatonic note above that E in the C scale is also an F.
Yes.
So the diatonic note is sometimes chromatic,
Yeah.
and the chromatic note is sometimes diatonic.
Yeah, like
So it gets a little confusing.
double function.
Yeah, so what I
Think
often
about
tell
double
students
function.
is learn the chromatic notes because they don't involve you to know it. They don't insist that you know as much theory to make them work. So it's easy. You just have to know where you're going and what is a half step below that and what is a half step above that. And then later, if you want to add the diatonic ones in, when you understand what's going on there, you can do that, right?
Right. Let's play as an example.
Sure.
Let's play the first A section. I'll play the chord change here, and you play the in 2, making
Okay.
example of the thing that you just mentioned.
Sure. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right?
Good. And while playing came to my mind. Okay, one question. Sometimes the chromatic approach, when you make a chromatic approach to the chord, this note does not belong neither the key, neither the chord.
Right.
Why does it sound nice?
It sounds nice because it creates tension which then resolves.
Okay.
So there was a point where we were playing, and he played a note that sounded really bad against my chromatic approach note until that chromatic approach note resolved.
Reach the
Yes.
the chord.
So for instance, if you play a C major voicing, and I play an E flat or a D sharp leading to that E, it sounds really bad until it resolves. And that's part of the nature of jazz. And with chromatic approach notes, it's what makes the bass line sound interesting as you're listening to it and you say, whoa, oh, right? It sounds strange and then it fixes itself when it resolves. It's just basic counterpoint that you have dissonance resolving to consonance.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this this is one of the main stuff about the walking bass line, or the 2-feel and the walking bass line, because you are always creating tension and release
Absolutely.
points.
Otherwise,
And-
it would be very boring.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of surfing,
Yeah.
you know, revolt sea with several waves, and you're tension release, tension release, tension release, and moving.
Absolutely.
Is
Yes.
a good metaphor for tension and release. And how can we step from two feel to walking bass line?
Okay, so I have a number of videos on this subject, and the one I think that people have said helps the most is where I talk about two methods to connect one root to another. One is linear, or walking, actually scalar walking, and the other one is arpeggiated. So if I'm trying to get from this C to this E, right? I'll just that much in the interest of time. So if I walk from the C to the E, I'm there too soon. I really want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, right? So if I'm walking and I get to there on beat 3, I have to do something on beat 4 and then get back there again on the next beat. So I would walk up, or
the trick is the stuff about this is because when you connect C to E, you have C, D, E, and you reach the E on the third beat, and you still have one more beat to get to the chord.
Right. I could also walk down from C, but then I will not make it all the way to E. So I would make it down to the G, and then I would jump to the E. Right? Which sounds very much like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, but it still works, right? So it's important for bass players learning to walk that you look at the most likely ways that it could happen. You can walk up, you can walk down, you can play an arpeggio up, and the easiest thing to do is to play root 3-5, right? And then an approach note.
Okay, that's a good one.
Right? And it could be, the approach note can be from above or below. So here's root 3-5, approach from below. Root 3-5, approach from above. Right? You can also jump down from the root to the third, which gives the motion a different contour.
Whoa,
right?
That's nice. That sounds nice.
Or root 3-5, approach from above, right?
Yeah.
And if you think that way, walk up, walk down, arpeggiate up, arpeggiate down. This gives you 4 different connections for every 2 chords that you're trying to connect. It gives you 4 different paths to get there, which is going to answer one of the questions I think that you will probably ask later about variety in a bass line.
Yeah.
But those are the places that I would start for any beginning student. And they'll come in and I'll say, okay, show me 4 different ways to connect this to that. And if you have those 4 different ways and you have access to them pretty quickly, you're going to have fun building a walking bass line.
Yes, absolutely. Let's play as an example, like some of these ideas. For example, connecting the chords scale-wise.
Sure.
And we can first play the first A scale-wise and the second A arpeggios.
Okay.
Let's do that. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, it's important to mention that when you're practicing these things, and it's funny because Milton said, let's do this on the A, on the first A, and do this on the second A. When you're actually playing, I don't think you would ever play a line that was all walking or all arpeggiated, right? In the same way that you would never talk with all these restrictions on, okay, we're only going to use these kind of words, and then we're only going to use these kinds of words. So it's actually very difficult to do that in a playing situation because you may hear an idea that makes more sense.
Yes.
And I think if you transcribe what I played, there are several places where I had to make an instant correction to what was going on. But in the practice room, it is absolutely important to be able to do that. even if you would never use that line completely that way in a real life playing situation, it's important to be able to have those tools, that vocabulary.
Okay. So a very good practice, like for learning how to connect the chords, would be like force the student, like for himself or herself, to play
Yes.
one strict way.
Yes.
It's harder, way harder than just playing, but the brain will make more connections.
Absolutely.
And it will be easier when you go to the real.
Yes, and
playing.
Milton will immediately roll his eyes when I say that. I always tell students, you make a very strong distinction between what you practice and what you play. When you practice, you're learning skills and you're learning to do very specific things, and you're being very rigorous and disciplined in what you're doing. When you play, at least when I play, that is the time when I try not to think about anything and just create music. And what I have practiced that has really stuck and has become part of my vocabulary will come out, and what is not ready yet will not come out. So when you practice, it is imperative, very important, to be disciplined even when it's hard, because those are the things that are going to eventually become part of your natural language.
Yes, I remember when you mentioned this in one of our lessons, and I thought, okay, this is deep, because sometimes we don't practice so systematically to learn all the skills.
Yes.
And when we go to the bandstand, we have like several lacks, several gaps that we cannot fill while playing.
Well, you and I are both older people now, right? But I teach a lot of younger people.
But I'm not older. I'm just turned 17.
Yes, you just turned 17. Yes, but I'm at least 22. So no, when I have very young students, they often want to. What they call practicing is playing things that they already know. And practicing is not about playing what you already know. It's playing the things that you don't know. And so basically trying something that you can't do yet, and then failing, and then trying again and fixing it until you can actually do it. And it's hard because it's very hard on your ego to only practice things that you can't do yet. Like now as an older person, I know if I can do something, it's time to stop practicing it and go on to the next thing that I can't do yet. But when I was younger, I would just keep playing the thing that I could do and feel really good about myself. And then I would get on the playing situation, and then I would be confronted with all of the things that I couldn't do, and I realized that I had wasted a lot of practice time.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll leave you to teach that lesson because I know you know it well. Yes.
Yeah, that's a very good advice. And what about variation of the bass line of the walking, for example? Should we play the same stuff, or what's the general performance practice of bass player?
Okay, I'm glad you said performance practice, because in performance practice, I try to think, if I were not the person playing this line and I were listening to this line, would I want to hear a slightly different bass line throughout the course of the song, or would I want to hear the same bass line repeated over and over and over? And when I ask myself the question in that way, I always come up with, I want the bass line to be an independent melody that evolves like any other melody and does not necessarily repeat itself. It doesn't mean that if parts of it repeat itself that it's bad, but as a bass player, I want to create at least slight variations on my line the entire time I'm playing, because that's the beauty of improvising to me is, oh yes, I've already done that in this song. Let me find a new way to get there to move the music forward. So yes, I'm always trying to spin variations. Sometimes they're drastic and sometimes they're very subtle. But for the sake of the music and for the sake of my sanity, I don't want to just play the same bass line, the same 32 bars of bass line 5 times over the course of the song. That's not musically satisfying, and it's very boring for me.
Yeah.
It's not creative.
Yeah, and sometimes if a listener is paying a lot of attention, okay, there comes that part of that the bass player will play the arpeggio and we reach the third of the next chord. Like the person can kind of memorize your bass line.
And the first thing that happens when a listener thinks they know what you're going to do, is they stop listening to you because they're already like, I don't have to listen to that anymore because I already know what they're going to do.
Yeah, that brings very good stuff. Like we bass players, we can create a bass line that always surprise the listener.
A little, yeah, and it's tough because you have to be clear and outline the form, but you have to also have variety in the way that you do that. Otherwise, it becomes predictable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's play as an example of that. Like we talked about connecting the bass lines scale-wise using arpeggios and creating variations. I just play using these tools. Like let's play one chorus, one entire chorus. Just play the bass line mixing all these elements together.
Okay. And you're gonna solo?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a short solo. I don't want to catch that rotation of the bass line.
Okay.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's nice. And just to the student like realize where a bass player can go, and one thing that we have discussed here in our bass lessons is like the bass line can take some freedom and act as a kind of counterpoint of the melody. And this is what, at least to me, is one of the most exciting parts of playing the jazz. Like when there's someone improvising, and I'm kind of trying to catch his or her idea and making, like, composing on the spot.
Right.
A counterpoint line, and sometimes we can find some really interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. Let's do that.
All right.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sorry, I didn't realize you wanted to play more rhythmically freely. Yeah.
That's the good thing. Like we realized it while playing.
Yeah.
Okay, and talking about rhythm freedom, how can we add some rhythm variation to the welcome bass line?
So the most common things are triplet ornaments. So one thing is ghost notes that propel the line forward. So I always tell students, first be able to build something before you embellish it. So first thing I want to hear from a student is straight quarter notes connected. Because that's the thing that you're eventually embellishing. But once you have that, you're thinking underneath everything. And so you're basically using these triplets in between the notes to propel the line forward to a release point.
Yeah. But one thing that all student, not only student, like every bass player must be careful is not to overuse.
Yes.
I remember when I had I did a course with Jeff Andrews, electric bass player. One thing that he mentioned is like sometimes the bass player uses this rhythm embellishment to make up the lack of swing.
Right.
Like because you can pretend that you swing just by adding a lot of
Yeah, a lot of students who are first learning about this, their lines end up sounding like. And that actually makes the line swing less than if you hadn't embellished it at all. So it has to be adding on to what you're doing and not something where just you get the idea that being busier means swinging harder, because it doesn't. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and how do I practice welcome bass lines? I know like we have several situations that we can practice. Obviously the best one is with actual musicians, like playing together and interacting. But sometimes we don't have people 24 hours available, and we have to practice at home. We have some apps that can have drum patterns that we can go, and the metronome.
Right. Yeah. At this point, all of those things are good. Honestly, if you're practicing building lines in a way where you're focusing on the things that you can't do yet and trying to learn to do them, I think that's good. Playing with other musicians is a great way to test what you know and what you don't, but playing with other musicians is not exactly practice. So I think it's very important to put what you do in time. So maybe either playing with a metronome or playing with a drum machine like Drum Genius or whatever, or even playing with a play along, and then stop and make some notes to yourself about where you struggle in whatever song it is that you're doing. At this point, if I assign a song to a student, I can look at the changes and I can already know that they're going to struggle here, and they're going to struggle here, and they're going to struggle here, and it's just from understanding the way that lines are put together. And when they do that, it's always important to stop and say, okay, now I'm going to try and figure out this part that I always trip up on. This connecting this chord to this chord always gets me in trouble, and my groove suffers there.
Okay.
So, but if you want to do more specific, how to practice with a metronome?
Yeah, one of the people I've listened, I've read people telling about practicing with metronome with the beats on 2 and 4. Is it a good thing?
Depends on who you ask. Yeah, if you're practicing with a metronome, the metronome is basically not letting you cheat. So if you tend to speed up or slow down, it will remind you you're speeding up or you're slowing down. I've known great players who say put the metronome on 1 and 3. I've known great players who say put the metronome on 2 and 4. I've known great players who say put the metronome only on 4 or only on 1. Whatever keeps you practicing is fine. I would say experiment with all of those things and find what works for you. And especially if you're working with a teacher and your teacher has a preference, just do what they want you to do because they're trying to help you.
Yeah.
Right.
And one thing that I like, one thing that I like is finding, like when I practice with the metronome, it's finding the worst to me, like the most uncomfortable position of the metronome.
Yes.
For example, when I'm practicing soloing and I'm using the metronome to keep the time, the metronome on 2 and 4 helps me.
Right.
So I put it on 1 and 3.
Right. Yes, exactly. Right. Again, the idea that you practice what you don't do well rather than what you already do well.
Yes, yes. Okay, and do you have suggestions of recordings and or bass players to listen? Because one thing that I know, like, we can like spend days and days talking
Sure.
about bass lines here, but if the student doesn't listen to the recording to just internalize the feel,
Right.
you never play that as it's supposed to be.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really hard one for me because what people like is so personal to them, and so what I like might not be what one of my students likes. So the first thing I encourage you is to listen to jazz recordings that really touch you. Not that your teacher says, oh, you just listen to this because it's a great recording. You listen to a lot of jazz and then find that whatever those jazz recordings are that really make you excited to play and learn what you can from those. Now, having said that, if you're going to be a jazz bass player, I'll name 4 people, 3 from the older generation, 2 of whom are gone, and 1 from the newer generation. I would listen to Ray Brown for the feeling of the walking bass line. Nobody had a happier swing feel that just makes you want to move than Ray Brown. It's the most wonderful, powerful thing. Paul Chambers is another one. So if you go back to the old Miles Davis recordings, all the way from, Kind of Blue to Workin', Cookin', Steamin', Relaxin', he's on all of those records, and that's the classic feel. Ron Carter is another one. Ron Carter, who's played with everybody, arguably the most recorded jazz bassist of all time. And the way that he builds lines is so logical and feels so good. He was with the late Miles quintets. And then today, you can't go wrong with Christian McBride.
Yeah.
I mean, the feel, it's like he is our modern day Ray Brown in terms of that. He even smiles in the same way that Ray does when he plays. But the most important thing, I've seen both Ray Brown and Christian McBride play in person. Not only do they both smile while they play, but as soon as they start to play, everybody in the audience starts to smile, which is, I think, that's the real feeling of a bass line. So if you, start with those people and then go from there.
Yeah, and like, as you said, like find recordings that touch your heart.
Yes.
And listen and just absorb the feeling. One thing that I like to do, like when I listen to bass players, especially live guys, like here in Louisville, when I listen to you, when I listen to Tyrone, I'm trying to just catch the feel of the moment, like how the bass sounds with the drums, with the horn, with the piano, and I try to memorize that feel. And when I'm playing, I try to recall that same feel. Like, am I feeling the same thing that I was when I was listening to?
Right. And especially, I mean, if you, some students don't have the opportunity to go hear great live jazz. But it is a different animal from hearing it on recordings. So sometimes just the fact of being in the room with the person and being able to watch and listen and feel what's coming off of them is enough to really light a fire under a student. I know the first time I saw Ray Brown, I had listened to Ray Brown recordings before with Oscar Peterson and with Gene Harris and all of these people. But the first time I saw Ray Brown play live, I understood all at once what the role of the jazz bass was supposed to do. It was to make everybody in the room feel like they wanted to dance, you know, and make everyone want to move and be like, oh, right, it's supposed to feel like that. And that, I don't think I ever would have gotten just from the recording, because it was like being there, and as soon as he started to play and looking around and everybody's like, oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So if you get a chance to experience it live, by all means, take it.
Yeah, and now I can like make everybody jealous, because man, you're listening probably from the headphones or your computer system or whatever, but you cannot imagine the power of the of this guy playing this instrument here. It's a huge pressure, like it's just a punch in your heart. Like it's actually one of the things that most catch my attention about your playing is how powerful and it's smooth at the same time.
Right.
You play and man, look at that! Like it's like a train. Like
right.
Nobody will stop me, but at the same time, I'm flying. It's not aggressive. Like it's beautiful to listen, but at the same time, really exciting. So. Yeah.
Well,
I know you are jealous. I'm listening here the power of this bass line.
I will just say, first of all, that's a very great compliment. But if any of that is true, that comes from exactly what he's talking about, of trying to channel the people who made me feel that way, of playing and trying to sound like Ray Brown, or sounding like Christian McBride, or sound like Ron Carter, or sound like Paul Chambers, or sound like Charlie Hayden, or whoever it is that matches the music. It's like those feelings are stored in some memory bank in my brain or my heart or something, and then the music starts, and I'm thinking, oh, this needs to feel like that. And as he said, you try to channel that energy that you remember somebody playing with, that you saw or heard them play with, and then you just let that go. And so that's always what what I'm going for when I play is it always came from somewhere else, and I'm just passing along a truth that somebody gave me, or trying to, it's like, oh, yeah. Can I make this guy here feel like I felt when I was listening to Ray Brown? And if I can do that, it's been a good night.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's nice. Very cute. And okay, to finish, please, if you want to learn a little more about Chris Fitzgerald, you can check his YouTube channels. There are several videos there with a lot of instructional stuff, something applied especially for the double bass, something that you can learn in general music, like tons of stuff. It's a very nice video about building bass lines,
right.
that one, about technique, some music analysis, some like posture, like several stuff. There's a
right.
huge
Some of them are specific to this instrument, and some of them are just general music. So if you go there and you find one and you're like, oh, this doesn't apply to me at all, look around, because the ones on walking bass lines can be done on any instrument. They don't.
Yes,
it doesn't
exactly.
have to be this instrument.
And that one that I also liked a lot, you and John Goldsby.
Yes.
That one is really nice.
Yeah, that one was fun.
Yeah, and it was fun because there's this. Actually, John mentions when you guys start commenting about the video. John mentions about there are people getting there, and I was.
Yes, you were in the background of that video. But yes, that's a great one. John
I was that day there,
a great
2014.
mentor of mine, so to get to do that video with him was amazing. And yes, Milton is walking in the door in the background on the video, which is very funny. Yes.
Yes. No, it was funny to me, like watching that video. I got into your channel. Okay, this must be nice with John Goldsby. I check and wow, nice. Bye bye Blackbird. I know that guy. It's me. Okay, let's finish playing. Let's finish playing. Stella by Starlight.
Which part do you want?
Whatever.
Melody?
Yeah, I can play the melody.
All right.
Here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Thank
good.
you.
That was. Thank you very much.